Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Don't worry, the chess drama will not be on this week's show. We've got instead politics. So we are recording this November 10th, right after the midterms election. Midterms? I'm thinking of school, Jonathan. Sorry. Of the midterm elections in 2022. And we had to have on special guest Jonathan Weiler of the Agony of Defeat podcast, namely because there's no Agony of Defeat because we're all busy with life. So for those that don't know, I'll try and wax effusive. Jonathan Weiler, who you can find as John, Jon Weiler on Twitter. If it's still around in a week, hopefully that's still relevant. If not, you have a wonderful Substack with lots of amazing posts, which we're definitely going to talk tonight. Professor at UNC Chapel Hill. Anything else you want to say, Jonathan?
No, that's great. That's a great intro. Thank you.
Oh, of course, writer of the hit book. It was a hit. It was definitely well received. Does it qualify? Did it hit lists and stuff?
I don't know about hit, but yeah, Prius or Pickup. Yeah,
Prius or Pickup is a must read in my opinion, which explains if you want the most, I would say, well researched and simple. So that's the nice combo, right? Of explaining modern day partisanship in the United States. Prius or Pickup is a must read. I am off my game. All right. And with me, as always, is our producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Plan for tonight, we're going to keep this mostly NBA centric for good and bad reasons, because we are going to talk Kyrie Irving. And I'm going to feel really bad putting you on the spot on this show, Jonathan, but there's no way the anti-Semitism in the NBA feels great. And I can at least empathize a little in saying, being in Wisconsin in 2016 and hearing the rhetoric Trump was saying about, basically Mexicans, but, even more importantly, immigrants. I'm second generation at this point, far removed. But at the same time, the stuff he was saying, while he was saying it, I was like, this is abhorrent. And then I kind of looked around and was expecting everybody else to say it too. Yeah. And the amount of silence from people that were close by was very disheartening, and that was my take. I've talked to Brian a little bit about this week. That was my take on it. And then I'll finish up the intro, and we can actually just go on the first topic. We're also going to talk the Knicks, some good, some bad, and then, of course, the election, because you can't have a professor that knows all about politics on the show and not talk one of the most amazing. I mean, this, I'll throw that question to you to start, and then we'll go on Kyrie, Jonathan. Where does this midterm election rank versus, say, like the 3-1 upset in 2016 with the Cavaliers? Because this was the shocking outcome, right?
I'm trying to think, what is the political equivalent of LeBron's chase down block in the final 30 seconds of Game 7? I don't know. Maybe it's the Michigan Democrats just running the table Tuesday night.
There we go. Fetterman. That was wild.
That's Pennsylvania, though. That's Pennsylvania.
No, but Fetterman is the better. I mean, first of all, he's 6'8", so
the best part about him, he is wearing he's a shorts and hoodie guy. That is my current outfit. Not willing to give in to it being fall just yet.
Yeah. No, Pennsylvania stepped up big Tuesday night also for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
All right. Well, actually, I'll do dealer's choice. Do you want to go Kyrie Irving first or politics? Either works fine by me.
Well, let's start with Kyrie and maybe not stay on him too long, because I kind of feel like he only deserves so much attention.
But
so why don't we start there?
Yeah, and like I said, my 2 cents basically remains, we're not shocked by this, because he has been a very weird person, and the modern world, especially with sports, where we're starting to get 100 millionaires really young. Back in the day on the Boxscore Geeks, myself and Devin Dignam would write a lot in defense of players, in defense of how they were underpaid. And even now I'm hitting a tipping point of going, if you're drafted 60th in the NBA draft, you're still going to be a multimillionaire, which was not always the case. The salaries have risen so much, and especially even for, wage suppressed first round draft picks, which Kyrie Irving was when he was a number 1 pick. So his wages were suppressed. Even at this point, he's getting so much money that he exists in a strata that most of us never can dream of. And that explains how he's fallen down a lot of the conspiracy rabbit holes, etc.
Yeah.
So, and he's been there for a while, and it's not shocking to be in a bubble that way. And then, of course, the most recent thing that happened, and it's problematic for many reasons, is he retweeted an anti-Semitic video that is playing on Amazon. So there's many questions there, right? You can be upset with him, rightfully so, for tweeting this out.
Yes.
Why is it on a major streaming service? Why does Twitter let it go? How have we gotten to the point that people are saying this? And then, like, I guess the final note on that is, the good news is his team was upset. His sponsors are upset. The league was upset. They gave what I would argue are very, very low bar. This is, HR is calling you in and saying you've made a major mistake and you're going to get fired. There are people that have been there. And then, of course, in the sports world, the bar for crossing over that is so low that he's even failed that. And as well, there's so much has happened in the last couple of years. He was also an anti-vaxxer in the midst of COVID, costing him, and to, again, a wild degree, costing himself millions because he was in one of the states that actually had a ban on if he was allowed to play.
Yeah.
So he was forced to sit and not get paid for games because he didn't want to get a vaccine. And Brian and I have talked this a lot, where that's remarkable in sports, because sports is a field where someone will tear an ACL and people will say, hey, you should rush back, which, this is that sports is not the field to say, hey, we do not ask our players to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. That is, one of the unsaid bylines for professional athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dre, a couple of thoughts. The first is, Dre and Brian, I don't know if you saw that video that's been going around the past couple of days. It's a 2018 PTI, pardon the interruption, clip between Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser. It's really fascinating. And maybe, I don't know, you all can put it in the show notes. But in it, they're talking about, it was a week in which Steph Curry and Mark Spears, and I think Kyrie, they were questioning the moon landing, okay? And Kyrie had already said that he thought the earth was flat. And what was really interesting about the clip between Wilbon and Kornheiser is Wilbon is like, they're both really pissed about it. They're like, Wilbon starts by saying, don't do that. Do not go down this, don't go down this rabbit hole. I know these guys. Jalen Rose was also saying this. Just because you can't find it on your phone doesn't mean it happened. And then Kornheiser, who's Jewish, says the next step after there's no moon landing is Holocaust denial, slavery denial, anti-science. It was so prescient. And so Dre, for me, in some ways, even before Kyrie started distributing this film that, among other things, claims the Holocaust never happened, the anti-vax stuff, look, we can have a debate about how far we should go in managing COVID, but anytime conspiracy theories are floated, I think especially as a Jewish person, my antenna are way up right away. Because conspiracy theory has been, that Jews control the world, the protocols of the elders of Zion. I mean, yes. This is age-old stuff. And I think that Kyrie, I'm not even sure he knows what he's saying half the time. So in a way, I don't really care about whether he's personally anti-Semitic or even what that means to him. What I care is the way those kinds of ideas get perpetuated in the world, because I know how dangerous they are.
Yes.
So 100%. And someone that I routinely lump you in with, I'm so happy you're both writing on Substack, is Adam Todd Brown. Adam Todd Brown runs the Unpopular Opinion Network, and this is what gets interesting. He has a lot of shows on conspiracy theories.
Okay.
But he is one of the few people that does it right. So one of the things he likes to do a lot is he will investigate a conspiracy theory. And a book that he's brought up that's a really famous kind of introduction is On a Pale Horse. And he's reviewed that book and gone, there are so many things demonstrably false in this book. That aren't even hard, right? Like the book, the same ideas where, they'll throw out an idea and say, hey, this and this. And of course, the shocking and frustrating part is it does usually end up back at anti-Semitism. He was trying to go over, what was the show on the Science Channel, the History Channel with Are Aliens Even Real?
Ancient Aliens is the name of that
Ancient
show.
Aliens.
Ancient Aliens.
He tried to do
that show.
It's a famous meme related to it.
Okay.
But he wanted to do a rewatch show for fun. So this was apropos of conspiracy theory, but was going through it. And sadly and shockingly, the alien theory really turns out to be run by a lot of people that are racist and anti-Semitic in nature.
Okay.
And the same thing where you're saying, you start hearing a couple things and your antenna pops up. The exact same type of thing. So, I'm promoting someone that does a lot, but I would say he is a conspiracy theory researcher, not a peddler. And he is actually one of the well-run people to that points stuff out about that, where looking for things like that. So when you're saying, you're noting the exact same thing, which is amazing. The moon landing and all these others. And you said it was both noticed, and you have the intent as well to go, oh, this is leading somewhere.
Yeah.
And I've seen this before. And that exact same type of stuff. And I'll give one last shout out before we move on a little more. Kyrie is he and you are both experts in fascism. He had an article the same week you were writing where I think he said something like, "When has the United States not been fascist?" So it was an interesting. Okay. You and him are both good writers.
I need to check him out. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's it.
What
he says.
Dre, let me say one more thing about Kyrie in terms of the suspension now. I'm interested in your guys' response to this, but I'm of two minds about it. I mean, on the one hand, I was just talking to a buddy on the phone a few minutes before I came on the podcast. One of my closest friends, super smart guy, very thoughtful about, racism and American society, and a real advocate for anti-racism and all that. And also somebody who, like me, is Jewish and feels at times like when things like this pop up, if it were some other group, there would be much more, just a much harsher response to, what Kyrie said than promoting Holocaust denial. But so the reason I bring that up is because, so he's been suspended, and there are these steps he has to take. And I agree with you, Dre. They're not hard steps. And so there's that on the one hand. On the other hand, I feel like we all know that this is so transparently a PR exercise. There's a part of me that's like, I know why we're doing it, but it still sticks in my craw a little bit, that it's so transparent, that it's not because Adam Silver's Jewish. Obviously, he cares about this issue. But like Nike is not dropping Kyrie, their relationship with Kyrie, because they really care about justice in the world. They're doing it because it's a business decision. And I'm not naive about that. I think I'm just expressing ambivalence about the way this stuff plays out when it's a high profile person like Kyrie.
Oh, I would 100% agree on that. The good news, right, is we've talked on this show a couple of times, right, Brian, about when the scales tip towards business, that's at least progress. And it's not fun and it never feels great. But when it's like, oh yeah, being racist isn't worth the money, it's like, okay, at least we're going forward, and we're not going forward for the right reasons, but there's something there. I would agree, though, that
Dre, let me just say about that. That is, in my mind, that is better than nothing. So I agree with you about that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I hate it too. But then, Brian, and I'll let you talk, Brian.
Sure.
But I was just going to say, you and I both talked a bit about, I agree. I'm shocked by the level of not only the low bar, but the low response. And the funny thing about what's happening with Kyrie, really, what we're saying is they set a very low bar. And the reason it's not getting crossed is all on Kyrie, is that he's got handlers. Like, Nike's not firing him because of what he said. Yeah. They are firing him because someone in his camp said, stop saying that, possibly even someone from Nike. And they probably even just said, hey, you can tweet video, you can tweet bad movies in the future. Just drop this one for a few weeks and it'll blow over, which is depressing in our modern era, but it's true. Yeah. And he couldn't do that. That's why he's gotten dropped. And then, like I said, Brian, I know you were shocked too about kind of how lukewarm the NBA's response has been.
Yeah, it's been slow, but they've been getting criticized, so it's heating up. It kind of reminds me of a reverse of an incident that was brought to our attention recently in the Michael Jordan documentary, Save the Last Dance. The Republicans buy sneakers also, or Republicans buy shoes also, right?
Right.
You know, maybe they don't care about it, but they're doing the right thing regardless. So it's really interesting. Yeah. And for Adam Silver, I want to, pick up on what you said earlier, that he's Jewish also. He was in the news today, and he met with Kyrie Irving. And what he came out of that meeting saying was, oh, I'm positive that he's not anti-Semitic coming out of this meeting, right? And this is making me think of, Kahneman and Tversky, right? Is that we have these debates about racism, like, oh, how could you call me racist? I'm not racist. You're the real racist for calling me racist. And it's so stupid, right? And the Kahneman and Tversky point is everyone has cognitive biases. Racism, anti-Semitism are part of those biases. So you're going to have those thoughts in your head no matter what, because you live in a society and you're influenced by everything around you. So what you can do is, work on what you say and do in public. And that's why it's ridiculous to be for Adam Silver says, well, he's clearly not anti-Semitic. Well, it doesn't matter if he is or not. The way he's acting is the problem. It doesn't matter what's in his heart, because, and we'll go back to Charles Barkley again, I'm not a role model. Well, you're a public figure. And if you're going to be collecting this big, multi-$10 million salary, your public actions do matter. The NBA has required media access. You have to behave if you're going to be an NBA superstar.
Just one more thing that you're making me think about, both of you actually, is just about Kyrie and his public presentation. I cannot separate him in my mind from Aaron Rodgers.
Yes.
The so two similar. Of them, they're so similar. They're both so arrogant. They're both not nearly as smart as they think they are. One went to Cal, one went to Duke. They've just, and they're so famous and they're so adored and they have such enormous audiences. Like, they're at the point now where in their minds, their greatness means that everybody should just bow down and, listen to what they have to say. And if they get pushback, they just double down.
That's right.
There's no sense of self-reflection at all. And I mean, I used to like Rodgers, and now I cannot stand him.
The pandemic was so. I think I said that in the midst of the pandemic, like Djokovic tennis and Rodgers football were two people that you could get me going on just where do they belong on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, to both of you, I have gotten a rig up for the webcams, so you are in camera now.
Okay. Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, did you do it before or after the massive amount of correct? We were. It wasn't what you were saying. You were the messenger, but Jonathan and I think our eyes both almost rolled out of our head when you were repeating the standard "not racist" Adam Silver rhetoric.
Right. Yeah.
But again, it's all corporate stuff, right? He has to say that. He's expected to say that.
Yes.
And the kind of, by the way, on the same depressing economics point, what makes me really sad about Kyrie Irving is I understand. I hate it. I want it clear that I hate it. I understand in sports when bad behavior is rewarded because a player is great. We talk Kobe on this show a lot. We don't talk because we're not really a football show, but Roethlisberger as a good example. Brett Favre. I mean, the recent stuff with Mississippi is tip of the iceberg. He is a horrible, awful person.
That might be the worst scandal that a sports player's ever done. Like, I can't think of one.
It is, Brian. It is way up there.
Maybe murder is worse, but not much else.
Yeah.
So all of the bad behavior being excused in horrible and people that are really good at getting a ball through a hoop at running fast is nothing new. Kyrie Irving has not been good in years, and again last year with the pandemic wasn't getting on the court. So from my perspective, it gets even funnier. I'm going, I understand when you make bad decisions, when you make unethical decisions to make money. I hate capitalism, but there you go. When you're doing it and it's for a player that's overpaid, that you're not going to give an extension to, that hasn't been healthy in years and is playing horribly and scared, Kyrie is probably the reason James Harden demanded a trade. So it's going, you are defending a horrible person that is ruining your team why? Like, you could at least gain a little goodwill out, like from a
Right,
capitalist perspective, like you could gain some goodwill out of this, but nope.
Dre, one
Dre,
theory
in a
about
way-
this. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, Dre, in a way, what you're saying is it's bad enough that the whole enterprise is amoral, but the fact that it's also stupid is really aggravating.
Yeah, it's like if you're, you know, there are times when somebody, you know, as an example, the tax thing. So I've worked for some big tech companies, and a major problem in the United States, for instance, like companies like Google and Apple have found creative ways to shelter their money, so you know that they're like incorporated in Ireland or something, or other wherever. The stuff I'm saying is years old, so they don't pay any taxes. That's bad.
Yeah.
Flip side, though, I completely understand where if someone gave you a little box when you're filling out your tax that says, would you like to say you're from Ireland so you don't have to pay any taxes this year? Who would say no to that?
Right.
So I understand it. But when it is just going like, if on your taxes it said like, would you like to light a tree on fire? And you're like, well, do I gain anything? It's like, no, just, do you want to? And you're like, yeah, sure. It's like, that's what these teams are doing. And it's super frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we've knocked that to death. Any comments to finish up on, Brian? To your point, we at least wanted to, we wanted to vehemently put on the show that we were not in favor of it. And certainly since we wanted you on in part because of the election, there's like, if we said nothing, this would be like the worst show in the world if we didn't comment. And I'm upset that we have to comment at all. I'm upset that it's in the news.
Yeah. I think we've given it its due.
I'll just say there is a theory out there that maybe Kyrie's hanging around because KD is ride or die with him. So maybe Durant is covering for Kyrie. That's a possibility, but I don't think we really know. But just like serious big picture stuff, you know, people have these cognitive biases or whatever, like we're talking about, Kahneman and Tversky, but big picture, why do elites, you know, feed these dehumanizing characterizations into the public? It's to dehumanize their opponents, and so their followers will commit political violence against them. And that's the big problem.
And Brian, to that point, probably the most important and troubling part of this story is that Kyrie has 17 million followers on Instagram.
That's right.
He's pushing this stuff out to, and yeah. And look, there are other more awful people in the world doing much worse things than Kyrie Irving, but he's an incredibly high-profile player, and he deserves the scrutiny he's getting right now.
Yep.
Well, that's and the Trump era, that's the rough thing. It is, there's this kind of false belief that almost Daily Show, right? That you can let a bad idea out there and then you kind of tear it down. And in some cases you are not obligated to give someone a platform. That's the frustrating part. The NBA is not obligated to let Kyrie do what he is doing. And people will say, "Was NBA player?" It's like, no, it's like he can do whatever he wants, irrespective of the NBA. Same thing, you know, like all three of us are probably in similar boats where we're allowed to get on podcasts and say what we want, but I don't, you know, come on and let's pretend I work for like XYZ Incorporated. I don't come on and say like, speaking on behalf of XYZ, then we'd have issues. So it's like, the NBA is under their, you know, their rights to say, you do this without us, and it would be nice if they did that a little harsher than they did. All right, so sad day is at least coming into the show. As soon as we invited you on, they went negative, Jonathan. We wanted to talk the Knicks because you are, for better or for worse, a Knicks fan. But part of that, your justification is
definitely for worse. There's no question.
Your justification is you're old enough to remember when they were good. So, you know, but you're still young at heart, at least.
Okay. Well, no, but just to give a tiny bit of context, I grew up 4 blocks from Madison Square Garden, and I'm turning 57 next week.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And the Knicks, of course, have not won a championship now in half a century. And but you know, it's this is my team till death do I part.
You mentioned that you got to see Dr. J play. Were you a Nets fan back in the day?
I was a huge Nets fan when the Nets were on Long Island. I was a Knicks fan, but I was also a huge Nets fan, and I've never loved a basketball player the way I love Dr. J in his prime. It was
and was it the Kentucky Colonels you mentioned on a tweet that you got to see him play the Kentucky Colonels, and he did the thing where he played so well, the opposing crowd was just like,
Yeah,
you
so
win.
this was probably like circa 1975. Guys like Louis Dampier and I think Dan Issel were on the Kentucky Colonels. Hubie Brown was the coach. And I was just watching on television. I mean, but Dr. J put on this unbelievable show in Kentucky one night. And obviously, Kentucky is a basketball savvy place. And they just, the fans just gave him such a huge ovation at the end of the game. Yeah.
By the way, this should speak to how great Dr. J was. So I just hopped to the 1975 basketball reference page for ABA statistics.
Yeah.
That's not specific enough to say he put on an amazing game against Kentucky. He had 3 40-point games against Kentucky that season.
Oh, there you go.
Just that good. And the reference I'll give to this is that someone was bringing up that Dr. J is not respected enough in the annals of all-time greats. For whatever reason, the NBA kind of does not want to give respect to the ABA, which is, of course, ludicrous because for those that don't know, Dr. J, the ABA was a rival league. It folded in the mid-70s. Because of the territory rights, so basically the Nets and the Knicks were both in New York. When the Nets were brought into the NBA, the Knicks said, hey, we have the New York territory. Sounds very grade schoolish or,
Sounds like pro wrestling territories.
Pro wrestling or Sopranos and said, you're not allowed on our turf. You have to pay us money and you have to go over to Jersey. So the Nets, as a result of that, fell apart. They were the best team in the ABA. They had just won a title against the Denver Nuggets. We'll forget that. Come into the NBA. Dr. J goes to the 76ers and takes them to a finals his first year in. And he wins an MVP in his mid-30s in the NBA.
I just want to say I remember all this very clearly, Dre. I was 10 or 11 when the ABA was folded into the NBA. Roy Bowe owned the Islanders and the Nets at the time. And for the reasons you said, he had to start selling off Nets players. I think he sold Dr. J to the Sixers for $3 million or something. And it absolutely crushed me. Yes. And they played in Piscataway, New Jersey, like where Rutgers played for many years, in this, dinky little gym. And I really kind of stopped rooting for them at that point. So
yeah, I mean, they weren't good for years. One other question, sorry to stay in the past, but did he keep the Islanders long enough for their greatness in the 80s?
My memory is that he sold them before their Stanley Cup run.
That's usually how it goes, right?
I'm not sure about
New hope.
And I was a huge Islanders fan, by the way, so I do remember very fondly that dynasty.
They took down Wayne Gretzky. I mean, that's something.
Oof.
Yeah.
All right, but speaking of the Knicks were actually doing well, or were doing well until you agreed to be on the show, and then they immediately lost to the Nets because the Nets got lucked. I mean, it is always funny when teams luck out. Like Kyrie getting benched was good for them, and they had to be told. Like that's the thing. He would be on the court, but so the biggest thing though, that I have to talk about, and I wrote about in this offseason, is Jalen Brunson was a really good move by the Knicks, and I was really just shocked when that happened.
Yes, because they've made so few good moves in the last 20, 25 years. I was shocked.
And if you compare teams, right, the Mavericks get the clout for being, a savvy, well-run team. I have many thoughts on that. I don't agree, but they're thought of as being the analytically savvy team. The Knicks are thought of as being the foolish team, or when they do have money to spend, they light it on fire. And Jalen Brunson is playing close to star level and is easily worth the money they're paying him.
I was going to say was a quite reasonable contract. So, right, I think like 4 years, 110 million or something like that.
And what people are definitely missing for sure is the salary caps have been rising, and I completely understand how that starts getting confusing because, as an example, the point in time when Steve Nash left the Mavericks, because the Mavericks let good players out the door, it's just their MO. They let him go over 13 million a season, and that was close to a max deal at the time. And now, right, we're saying they let Jalen Brunson go for 26 million a season, somewhere in there. And when I looked at the numbers, I basically said this guy that is a league average contract. if that makes any sense. So I was like,
yeah.
works for me. Or starter,
Like,
I would say league average
I
starter.
was going to say for a good veteran, right? It's in the ballpark.
Another way to look at it is as we get into the new CBA, that's going to be roughly double the mid-level exception.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Oh, that's it. I actually really like that way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say something about where the Knicks are, which is because there's in the NBA in particular, of course, we've been having this tanking discussion for years, and people always say some version of you're either playing for a championship or you might as well tank and try to get draft picks because who wants to be in 40 win purgatory? And my experience as a fan, especially since, 2 years ago, when the season coming out of, COVID lockdown, when the Knicks had a surprisingly good season and made the playoffs and finished a few games above 500, I will any day of the week take competitive basketball over 15 and 67, especially when there's no guarantee at all that gets you back to championship level. Like for years, the Knicks were unwatchable, and I like watching them now. It's fun. Like they're not good every night, and they give too many minutes to R.J. Barrett and Julius Randle. When he starts shooting threes, I want to scream. But they're competitive and they're fun, and I'm totally not on board with that. Either tank, either be great or tank because it's not worth being in the middle. I just feel like that's not what it means to be a fan. So anyway, just a comment about where the Knicks are right now.
Yeah,
so
this
on
is
board.
our wheelhouse.
The easy follow-up that I have is the team of the Portland Trailblazers.
Yeah.
As in, they've never won a title, but there were a couple times, as an example, I think it was against the Warriors, if I'm not mistaken, but they were in a couple playoffs. Oh, no, it wasn't against, they got shut down by the Warriors, but they had a playoffs where their opposing team got injured and the Warriors advanced unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And of course, you're the Knicks fan. Let's not forget the last time they made the finals was in 1999. By the way, there's a very, I hate to put single numbers or single reasons to an economist saying the reason is, and to a political, politics and economists, you never want to say there's only one reason. But I'll point this out. James Dolan took over the team in 1999.
Yes.
Yeah. And they have been the worst run team in the NBA since then.
I know that.
There's some luck that I'll put in quotes, that Donald Sterling got kicked out. But even that, don't forget, Sterling had picked up Chris Paul. So the Knicks under, like, if you did buy ownership, the Knicks are bar none the worst run. Like, he's the worst.
When I used to write my sports blog, the ESPN Watch, I spent a lot of energy trashing James Dolan, who I hate.
That was a great blog.
And we stress the same thing. It's like, it's not even that he, wins. Like, he'll kick Charles Oakley out. He gets in, he'll pick fights with Spike Lee. It's like, you're not even doing you're literally just being a movie villain. None of what you are doing is making your team better. It's not making you richer. You're just being a jerk.
Well, and Andre, I mean, to mix our sports with our politics, he's so Trumpian. I mean, he, anything has in his life, he owes to his father. He's such a mediocrity on his own. He's such an egomaniac. He's such an asshole. he's just a horrible, horrible human being. And I wouldn't care except that he owns my basketball team.
Yeah, so. It's very frustrating when these people that were like, this person is terrible, and you're like, and they are in charge of something that I like. Worst case is politics, but when it's like, and they are in charge of something that directly affects me, it is the absolute worst.
Yeah. To be clear, Jim Dolan owning the Knicks is not as bad as Donald Trump being president of the United States. I don't want anyone to misunderstand.
Well, and that's one reason we like sports, is that we can come in here and be super duper upset about any of these billionaire owners making stupid decisions. And at the end of the day, James Dolan overpaying RJ Barrett doesn't affect me that much. Whereas Donald Trump arbitrarily getting upset and writing a executive order can have a huge impact on me.
Yes. I want to say one more thing about the Knicks, which is that, and I'm interested in your all's thoughts about this. I I love Obi Toppin,
He's looking real
and
good this year.
he's looking real good. He was looking good last year too. And can someone explain to me why he's still getting 15, 16 minutes a game?
I don't have an answer. I think
Okay.
Tibbs likes his guys is one thing.
I guess so. I think what frustrates me about the Knicks now is they've got some legit good players on their roster, and they really misallocate their minutes.
That is 100% my wheelhouse. As a perspective, so I mess up names of players I don't know, but on the Knicks this season, so the good news is the box score Geeks numbers are up. The team page is a little messed up. I still need to get that fixed, but we do have player numbers, and so Obi Toppin is the fourth highest total wins player on the Knicks, and arguably number two. Like basically him, Jalen Brunson, and Isaiah Hartenstein are about the same. So their star is Mitchell Robinson. Julius Randle is okay, but that's the real issue. Is Julius Randle is their really expensive, high points per game player. Although I'll throw this out to you per minute. Julius Randle 29.3 points per 48 minutes. Obi Toppin 28.1. So if they gave him more minutes, he might look just as good as Julius Randle.
Yeah, and RJ Barrett, I believe I looked this up.
He's terrible.
Has the most minutes on the team.
The rough part is there are only 3 players on the Knicks at the moment with over 300 minutes played. Those are Randall, Barrett, and Brunson, and we have a very Goldilocks in the 3 Bears situation. RJ Barrett is terrible and has no place on any NBA roster. He breaks our rule, namely you can't give a player playing that bad minutes, period. Julius Randle is fine. He's not great. You know, I would probably put him in the kind of Klay Thompson circa 2015, Brian.
Ooh, okay. I was going to say Klay Thompson now is a little rough, but yeah, 2015, sure.
Well, Klay Thompson's just injured. And then Jalen Brunson is fantastic and great. Yeah. So that's the state. And I mean, that's nothing new for teams. We see it all the time. And it's interesting. I do want to look up more on him about clearly he's got to be on a cheap contract. Is he rookie, or it looks like he's third year in the league?
Yeah, he's third year in the league. The Knicks actually drafted him ahead of Tyrese Halliburton in that draft, which is somewhat painful. It's only mitigated by the fact that Toppin is actually good. I mean, he's not as good, but so he was in that draft.
And what is frustrating actually is he's one of these anomalous players where he's been good his entire career, as in about 700 minutes as a rookie, a little above average. Wins per 48 of 100 is average, 200 is star, 150 is like great. He's at 111, which is very good. And for a rookie is fantastic, because what should be noted is rookies on average are below average players. So he's above average as a rookie. He was basically this year's Jalen Brunson level last year and has kept that up. So yeah, I mean, the reason he's not getting minutes is those minutes are going to Julius Randle. And the rough part about the Knicks at the moment, I would say, breaking them down, really is their front court. They have a lot of really talented players. Hartenstein, Robinson, Toppin, Randall's even fine. They have some really bad RJ Barrett is terrible. Evan Fournier, I remember him back on the Nuggets, but that's forever ago. And Cam Reddish are all god awful. Yes. And those players are just getting too many minutes. So it's like they have a glut of great players in their front court that they're still not allocating correctly, and a bunch of horrible players in their back court, which is a real bummer. And then I think also Derrick Rose looks like he might just be getting old. I know he
talk about Tibbs likes his guys. He's still got Derrick Rose.
That's right.
Well, Derrick Rose did look good last year. I mean, and that's again one of these.
That's fair.
Derrick Rose, one of these frustrating where it's like, I can be very upset morally about him, but then there have been a couple seasons recently where he's played well enough. I'm like, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. But it looks he is not playing well this season, and either it's rough start. But he is a perpetually injured player, and he's not young anymore. I mean, we were blogging about him
34 or something now. Or?
Yeah, he's been in the league a long time.
Calling him super old when he's like 10 years younger than me. But I mean, he was a player we were talking about a ton early, 34 and 37 days. We were talking a ton about him early days of Wages of Wins. And I mean, that was over a decade ago at this point.
Yeah. All right. Should we?
Let's do, well, let's talk about something honestly exciting. So I'm just going to yield the floor to you, Jonathan, because you'll even do a better up, but like the midterm sum up and how you're feeling after it.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, of course, I mean, the big story is how much Democrats exceeded expectations. I wrote about this on my Substack. There are these poli-sci models that look at fundamentals. They don't take into account polling. They look at basic things like who occupies the White House, what the state of the economy is based on measures like inflation, for example, in the 6 months before the election, and basic factors like that. And everything about all of the inputs into those standard poli-sci models, which I will say typically are pretty good at predicting the outcomes of elections, including midterm elections, pointed to Democrats getting hammered this year. And obviously in this case, they were wrong. I would say the polling, actually, there's so many polls now and there's so much noise that it is hard to sift through the noise, but the nonpartisan premium polls, I think overall actually did pretty well.
Yes.
And we can talk about that a little bit more. But it does feel like the political media really cherry picked the polling also, to create a narrative that it was going to be a terrible night for Democrats. So, I mean, so the first story, just the horse race story, is how much Democrats exceeded what most people expected. I think in some ways more interesting will be for us to talk about why that is. But so I guess that's the first thing to say. What's interesting is earlier in the summer, after the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, a lot of people were wondering, is this issue going to upset the normal midterm dynamic in which one would expect the party in power to do poorly? And for much of the summer, I think people were thinking that, especially after the referendum in Kansas in August, where Kansas voters overwhelmingly rejected a measure that basically would have paved the way for a constitutional ban on abortion in the state of Kansas, that, oh, well, in fact, the sort of political energy is on the side of pro-choice, pro-abortion forces, and this is going to cut against, the usual midterm effect. But then the polling sort of in the last few weeks seemed to suggest that that was no longer a factor. And I think it turns out that that was a factor. And so, again, just to sort of to start to talk about why Democrats did better than expected, it does seem quite clear that that issue is one of the big reasons. And I just want to say about that, I don't want to be too monologue-y about this.
Oh, no. That's why you're here.
But I want to say about that what I think is interesting to pay attention to is not only that there were 5 states in which there were abortion measures of one sort or another, and the pro-abortion position won in every state. That includes Montana and Kentucky, by the way. But it's not just this election. We've got a whole new cohort of people who are coming of age, who are voted. This election was the first election they voted in. They're young adults. They are being socialized into what in many cases will be their political allegiances for the rest of their lives. And they're doing it in an era where abortion extremism has become mainstream in the Republican Party. So I think that's a really interesting potential dynamic, especially for young women who are already, overall not conservative anyway. But I think this could really push an increasing proportion of that cohort into being Democrats for the foreseeable future. So I just think that's one really interesting outcome, not just of this election, but potentially of the years ahead.
Can I ask a depressing thing about two cohorts? You might kind of count as one, Brian. I don't know. We've talked you on the edge. What is the deal with older white women and Generation X? Because it is shocking on these exit polls to see the amount that still goes red for that, where you see these groups of people. Like, for me, the odd part, and I'll throw out maybe.
I'm by the way, so I'm Gen X.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I barely made it over the line. I'm a year too young to be a boomer. I'm Gen X. And as a friend of mine who's a political writer said on Twitter recently, everyone complains about the boomers politically. Gen X is the worst.
Yes.
Especially white Gen X. I mean,
Gen X is worse than the boomers. I've been seeing that as well.
Yes. So
I don't have an explanation though, Dre. I've been seeing those numbers, but I haven't seen anyone try to tease it out yet.
I'll take a shot at an explanation. I think that to at least to some degree, there are socialization effects, and a lot of the Gen Xers, first started voting. At least the older Gen Xers, during the Reagan era.
Yeah,
and I do think that that's formative, and into the early Bush era, and even the Clinton era in the 90s, which was a moderate conservative Democrat. I mean, I think that cohort came of age when the political spectrum was really, liberalism was really it was just weakened then.
Yes.
And I think that matters. So,
and I mean,
at least one explanation.
That's nice, because
I like that one.
Before the show, or even very early on the show, we were talking if I'm a Bucks fan. So I've lived in Wisconsin for a long time now. It's the longest I've lived any place as an adult. At this point, my kid was born here, and that's the plan, right? He's going to live here. And you asked if I was a Bucks fan. And I was like, but I still talk about the Nuggets all the time. I grew up, my formative years. I got a Dikembe Mutombo poster. I think either I got it or my friend got it as a kid, and I've since bought it again. It's a 6'6" poster of Dikembe Mutombo that if you put 6 inches off the ground, it's full size. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. Formative years. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because that's even the same thing you say in Prius or Pickup, is these things that don't seem related to politics at all, keep up with it. Now, I've got a weird follow-up question on that, which depresses me thinking of this. Reagan is arguably the worst president in modern era. I'll say modern era because it's worth noting that as much as we lionize the founding fathers, there are some god-awful people back then. Andrew Jackson has to be rolling in his grave every time Trump's called the worst president or the most evil. He's like, what do I got to do here? But modern era, Reagan is probably the worst president, who tore down a lot of social nets, tore down the unions, got rid of, actually, if you're talking gun bans, brought gun bans to California, put a lot of homeless people out. But he is lionized. He is lionized still. You're like, Reagan was the best president. Is Trump still going to be remembered fondly by a lot of people in 20, 30 years? That's a depressing thought to think.
Well, so let me say a couple of things. First of all, there's a great book. Carol Anderson is a great historian at Emory University, wrote a book a few years ago called White Rage.
Yes.
Well, she takes these different, Brian, are you familiar with that book?
A little bit, but go on.
Yeah. So anyway, so she takes a few different periods in American history, like Reconstruction, after World War I, sort of the reaction to the civil rights era, and then Reagan, essentially to show all of the ways that white people, but from a sort of political policy perspective, have just been, have been perpetuating racism throughout American history. But her chapter on Reagan and what he did to the social safety net and the specifically racist features of what Reagan did to the social safety net, it's among the most damning indictments of Reagan you can read. So I will never forget election night 1980. I was just shy of my 15th birthday. I grew up in a very liberal household in New York City. That was the night that Reagan won election to the presidency. in a landslide over Jimmy Carter. And all of these other liberal lions, like George McGovern, lost his Senate seat, and Frank Church and Birch Bayh. And my mother we were watching the returns on television, and my mother was just saying, I just feel so badly for you kids. My sister's a couple of years older than me, that you're about to enter this era, this terrible conservative era with this guy as your president. I'll never forget that. So so I'm not a Reagan fan, but to your question, Dre, something tells me, I mean, if you remember Obama, early 2008, he actually got a lot of heat for this. He sat for an interview when he was running for president that year. He didn't say he basically said, like, I would like to be the kind of transformative president that Reagan was, or I would like to be the person who is sort of the liberal, counterbalance to the transformative presidency that Reagan was. And he took heat because it made it sound like he was praising Reagan, but he really was just sort of talking about his influence on our whole political order.
Building a big tent party, right? That's what Reagan did. Obama tried to do that
the
too.
idea that, like, you were fighting on Reagan's terms after Reagan, even if you disagreed with them.
Yes.
And so I don't feel like Trump is that. Like, I don't think in 20 to 30 years, people are going to be talking about how Trump set the terms of debate for a generation and had such a big impact on government. I mean, the one real legacy of Trump is that lucky SOB got to pick 3 Supreme Court justices in 4 years.
Yeah.
That's an all-time fluke that he got to do that. And that legacy is going to be with us for a long time. But in terms of that kind of Reaganite transformative presidency, I don't know how you all would respond to that. I don't see that.
I mean, I hope not, because it was interesting. I was watching a show called Family Ties, which was popular in the 80s. And the
Michael
crux,
J. Fox. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's hilarious because Michael J. Fox is that was what made him, and he is a conservative bastard, and we'd all hate. He's someone, and he's that character in the real world became a horrible senator that's voting for all the stuff we hate right now if we follow it. But that show basically did the joke
I think that's Ted Cruz, actually.
It's Canadian. That lands. I'm after this show, I'm tweeting that out, and I'll credit you. But I'm going to say I hate to ruin a bunch of people, but be aware that Michael
J. Fox was great on that show. By the way,
he was amazing. I mean, that's the problem. Too. It's his charisma overwhelmed the horrible things. I remember watching that show, and one of the early episodes, he gets a date with a girl, and her family is a member of a country club that is still segregationist, which is the 80s. And the end of the show ends in the classic way where the dad's like, I'm sorry that I was upset with you about that. And the dad rushes down to the country club to say it's not okay. And Michael J. Fox gets upset that he gets embarrassed. And the end, the dad concedes and is like, I'm sorry I was wrong. And I'm like, no. I'm like, that's not the lesson. The lesson should be like, get out of my house if that's the type of person you want to date. But anyway, and that's why we're where we're at now. But anyway, but on that show, routinely, they would actually bring up Nixon. And the joke was that Michael J. Fox was defending Nixon, and that the Keaton family, the grandpa was conservative as well, was defending Nixon. So it was worth noting that in our history, we like to pretend that, Nixon is this horrible person. But I'll just say in pop culture in the 80s, he was still getting defended. Ronald Reagan was never that unpopular. So the fear is, of course, no one's going to admit in the future that they were wrong about Trump. Mm-hmm. It is at least useful that you're saying it, right? Like, his legacy won't live on that way. I actually don't want to ask about the justices. Sorry, I got 2 questions, and Brian's brought up one.
All right, but let me say one thing before you continue, Dre, which is the other thing about Trump, and it's sort of this like incredibly disturbing aura that Trump still has. It's really important to remember Reagan was a very popular president.
That was my point. Yeah.
Never popular.
Nixon was popular as well.
Nixon was popular as well too for a while. Trump was he lost the popular vote in 2016. His approval ratings were well underwater for every day of his presidency.
Yeah.
So that, and again, I do think that's an important, he's got his crazy cult following, no doubt about that. But he has never been a popular political figure.
And it is worth noting, got to shout out this. Minnesota was the only state in Reagan's second term that didn't vote for him. So Minnesota is the only acceptable state. Just
yes.
But on the courts, with him stacking it with three justices, conservative justices, and how partisan the court has become. Because I did hear a podcast with someone talking the Supreme Court way back in the day, where they noted on the one hand the disruption of the court was bad, but the worst part is that, very much like your books have talked about, it had become partisan. That there were bipartisan court, things that the court would agree on no matter who had appointed them. But we've gotten to the point where it is very stick with your party allegiances. Is there a possibility for reform in the court? I mean, I know Joe Biden was kind of talking about it and didn't expect it to happen, but could potentially see that in some point in the near future. And then Brian mentioned that one good piece of news is Trump was a very lazy president. And by having the majority in the Senate now, 2 times basically for Biden has been appointing a lot of people to lower courts. And so the legislative branch has hurt us recently, but there might be some hope for optimism in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, Trump was able to get a lot of judges on the federal bench in his 4 years, leaving aside the justices on the Supreme Court for a minute. I know in Biden's first year, Democrats made a lot of hay. From what I've read this year, things have slowed down quite a bit. My hope is that after January 2023, especially if Democrats lose the House, which is likely, there really won't be anything for them to do legislatively because they're not going to pass any laws anyway, which means they can devote themselves full time to filling every conceivable vacancy in the federal bench. And that itself will be incredibly important. So I'm hoping at a minimum that they do that. In terms of your larger question about court reform, I'm sure you both remember this, that when Biden first came into office, and shockingly, Democrats, because that's my team, the Democrats, we won 2 special elections in Georgia, right? Both Ossoff and Warnock. We got to 50. We got control of the Senate. There was this hope that there would be, the possibility of so-called court packing or expanding the court. There's no majority for that now in the Senate or in Congress. But I would say if in a few years Democrats do get enough of a majority in Congress and they have a Democratic president, I think the push to expand the court is only going to grow. And I think it's a consequence of the declining legitimacy of the Supreme Court, that conversation, which old timers like Biden, I think that the thought of that really makes his skin crawl. But I think newer generations of Democrats aren't going to have that hang up. And so none of this is going to happen imminently because we don't have the majorities for it. But I think that is the path to changing the dynamic on the court. And if, we're all well and healthy enough to be talking 10 years from now, maybe that's something that will be happening now.
Yeah, and Dre, just kind of mechanically speaking, you can only do things in the Senate with 50 votes. It's very limited, right? It can be the budget. It can be judges like we were talking about. But normally everything is an automatic filibuster that's not protected by a carve-out. So you do need at least 60 votes to pass anything at all in the Senate that's not on that specific list. Judges are one of those things. But yes, Congress does control the number of Supreme Court judges. It could expand the number of judges if it wanted to. And it's been different numbers in the past. It hasn't always been what it is now.
Correct. It's been 9 for, but by statute, it's been 9, I think, since the 19th century. But to Brian's point, it's just a law that could change. And also to your point, Brian, about the filibuster, and everybody, there's been lots of talk in the Democratic Party about that
Very
too.
good point.
Right, that the next time the Democrats have the opportunity and they're not blocked by Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, they may just get rid of the filibuster. right?
And the Republicans will do it the next time they're in control. The filibuster
will
probably is going away in the next 10 years.
Right. And then the other, I think, sort of big reform agenda item that could change political dynamics as well, again, not now, but in a few years, is expanding statehood.
Yes.
And DC would be number one on that list. It's frankly outrageous that they're not a state.
Look at the 1/6 insurrection. They couldn't protect themselves with the National Guard.
Yes. Three-quarters of a million people who can vote for president but aren't represented in Congress. Puerto Rico, a lot of people have talked about as another potential target for statehood. I know that's a little bit more complicated. They voted on that issue before, but
it's worth pointing out Arturo does not want to be a state. He wants independence.
Okay. And I'm mindful that that's I think that's why sentiment is more. It is more split there on that issue. But DC is like it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, and I think that will happen at some point. And that will feed into all these dynamics too. Who controls the Senate, breaking the filibuster, expanding the court. All of these things are potentially connected.
Can I just add to that real fast on the filibuster?
Yeah.
The filibuster is not a law. It's a Senate rule. So all you need to do is have 50 senators, whoever is controlling the Senate, vote to not have it for that session. It's just that we've never had 50 senators that want to do it, including...
Well, we haven't had 50 senators who wanted to do it after the point at which it became a routine part of.
That's right. In the last 10 years,
process, which is basically been the last decade or so. That's right.
That's wild. So I'll ask both of you. I'll start with Jonathan. You optimistic for the future? I mean, we're kind of talking about like, hey, maybe things can change. I mean, is this give, or are we still in 2 years still going to have stuff to worry about?
So. If you'd asked me this question a week ago, I would have given a total Eeyore answer. Now I'm feeling a little bit. It's funny. It's funny what a good night can do for you. But I've said to friends of mine before that, in spite of my sort of native cynicism and whatever, I didn't realize that I was a political optimist basically my entire adult life until the night I wasn't anymore. And the night I realized I wasn't anymore was the night that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, 6 weeks before the 2020 election. And it was clear that Trump was going to get a third Supreme Court justice appointee, and we were going to lose the court for a generation, basically. And at that moment, I was like, you know what? Martin Luther King Jr. is an all-time hero, of course. But the notion that the arc of history is long and bends toward justice, I don't think I believe that anymore.
It's pretty damn long.
And, I used to be one of those folks who did believe that demography was destiny. The United States is becoming increasingly non-white. The Republican Party is no longer going to have a viable path to political success. The Republican Party themselves thought that after Obama won re-election in 2012. And that they needed to pivot and to better appeal to Latina voters, for example, and to be less clearly racist. Lindsey Graham said that after the 2012 elections. And then what did they turn around and do? They nominated Donald Trump and won the presidency. So to answer your question, Dre, I no longer am an optimist. I wouldn't say I'm a pessimist either. I just feel like we're just in for an indefinite slog where every victory is going to have to be fought for tooth and nail. And it's a weird feature of our politics now, not only that we're polarized the way that we are, but it's so close. Like we are so evenly divided in a political sense. And all of these races it's crazy. The number of races that are being decided by, a relative handful of votes. I just feel like the other side is not going to stop fighting tooth and nail. And so we can't stop fighting tooth and nail.
And it's very frustrating, the stuff we are fighting over. Your book was, I'm talking producer pickup, depressing in what it said, but revelatory in what I had also seen was when you're talking about the overt racism in the Republican Party is really standing in their way, which is ironic. If they were willing to give up 10% of the racism, which is remarkable, which it sucks to have to say it that way. If they could be 10% less racist, they could crush on things. And I talked to Adam Todd Brown earlier, and one thing he noted is an easy division is people mocked Trump for saying he was going to court the black vote. A plan he had for that was basically if you used Hispanic Americans as a punching bag to say, they're getting housing, I'll open up housing for you. There was a pathway there. And this was stuff that was on his website. Now, let's be clear. That was not Trump's plan. That was that was a, you know, dyed in the wool Republican plan. But the plan going, if we were willing to appeal to disenfranchised African Americans saying the Democrats have been promising you stuff for years, you're not getting it, we're going to give it to you. Now, you keep the racism up because you pivot to Hispanic Americans. There is a pathway there. And they don't want to do that. Like, basically, it is not acceptable, and that has kept it. And what is frustrating is the kind of, I don't want to say fascist, but the very stringent, rigid mentality. It appeals to a lot of people, and they'll even ignore racism. By the fault I've seen with cousins of mine, for instance, is like they don't think they're the ones being talked about, even though they are explicitly the ones being talked about. When Trump says they're sending their worst from over there, and your mother is from over there, and you think, oh, he's not talking about me, I'm one of the good ones. Like, what? You're nuts. But to that point, there is, it's interesting to see what could happen in the near future. But there is the hope that if they don't let go of that, of holding on to the racism, that maybe there will be a tip. I don't know.
Well, and I'll just say quickly to that point, Dre, about the being a little less than totally crazy. And everyone's talking about Ron DeSantis and what a big night he had. Mike DeWine, the Ohio governor. Just won I think it's, what is it, Brian? I think he won a 25-point victory.
It was huge. And the point you're getting at is ticket splitting, right? That the non-MAGA Republicans, if they were in the same state as a MAGA Republican, the non-MAGA Republican would always outperform. If we're talking about like senator versus governor,
JD Vance is going to end up winning by 5.5 points. The Trump-backed, dickhead Ohio guy who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, which I just want to say, when I read it in 2016, I thought was one of the most overrated books of all time. But
sounds awful.
So there's a 20-point gap between DeWine's victory and Vance's victory. Brian and DeWine, to his credit, early in COVID, I didn't love everything he did about COVID in Ohio, but he took the science seriously. He tried to be responsible. He's very conservative. I can't stand him, but he wasn't crazy, and he romped to victory. I mean, that path is open to them, but they are addicted to they are addicted to the most divisive racist politics in many places, and it's costing them. The flip side of that, and I think, again, thinking about your question, Dre, about whether I'm an optimist or not. Look, my politics are well to the left. I'm a Bernie supporter. I'm a social democrat. I'm happy to call myself a socialist. My politics, as I get older, I no longer believe that there is a majority appetite in the United States for that politics. And so that's depressing. I like to think that the younger generation will be more open to that than my generation, for example. But I have a more, I guess, sort of sober view of what's possible in American politics, partly for structural reasons, partly for cultural reasons, than I would say I did, when I was younger.
Oh, I'll agree with that. I was going to say, Brian, that'll be a tough act to follow, but any thoughts on
that's very
optimism
well
for the
said.
future?
No, I do feel optimistic. Look,
Oh, good. Yes, Brian, please, please say why.
Well, I was gonna start with the non-optimistic part, which is
Okay,
that
all right. Yeah.
so I guess I'm being a little bit Bayesian here. I'm trying to think of all the different scenarios that could happen going forward. And the bad ones are just so catastrophic. They're just really bad, and we can all imagine what they are, right? I don't think they're very likely though, and they are terrifying. But I think the good scenarios are so much more likely. We talked about the demographic switch earlier, right? The Obama coalition, and I think what the two of you were getting at is that the Republican Party's issue electorally is that they're not a party that's trying to win elections anymore. They're trying to gain power through other means, through breaking the legal system or violence or whatever. So that's why they're not
rigging maps, right?
That's right. Yeah, they're famously the Red Map Initiative, where a Republican guy who was drawing maps with algorithms died, and his daughter was liberal and found all his data after he was dead and exposed like this gerrymandering project. Yeah, stuff like that. But no, I do think I do really believe in the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z especially. We have our first Gen Z member of Congress now, Maxwell Frost. Like, it's amazing. Yes. And he's an incredible guy. I think he's 25, something like that.
He's 25. He is exactly my daughter's age, by the way.
Amazing. Yes. So we have all this data and information now that we can consider all these bad situations. We saw the Capitol get sacked, but Drea was talking about this earlier. The quote from World War II, Admiral Yamamoto, after Pearl Harbor, he was concerned they had awoken the sleeping giant. It took America years and years and years to get into World War II. It was at first 70% against in the polls, but then by the time Pearl Harbor hit, it was 70 to 80% for, and that's what you need to go do stuff in a democracy, right? So, I think things are turning around, and
so maybe one sleeping giant, right? You're suggesting, Brian, is younger voters.
Just that people are now understanding that we're not in a malaise anymore. We're in a serious situation. The turnout for this midterm, I think, was the highest midterm turnout, I don't know, in 100 years, in a long time.
I think it's looking like it will be a little lower than 2018, but
interesting. I was saying different.
Yes, Dave Wasserman, who's
Cook Political Report,
right, Cook Political Report, the guy who's his signature line when he's tracking an election is, "I've seen enough."
That's right.
And he's so good at it. He tweeted out today that it's going to fall short of 2018,
interesting.
But Brian, your point is still. We are. There's no doubt we're in a new era of higher turnout than has been the case in the past, for sure.
So just going back to what you said about the Reagan era, I was a little bit younger than you, but I still remember. I'm Gen X, and I remember it vividly. My family were New Deal Democrats as well, and it was such a mind fuck that all the media elites and everyone loved Reagan and couldn't see what we saw. Now things are a lot more clear. I think the battle lines are a lot more drawn, and I don't know.
That's actually an interesting glass half full way of thinking about polarization in a way.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah,
and I appreciate that. I do think there's that's a reasonable way to think about it. Yeah.
But polarization, of course, everyone's massively worried about as well. Ezra Klein just wrote a book about it. Yeah, it's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah.
And by the way, one interesting sleeping giant metaphor that I didn't get out earlier, so I'll waste it at the end here as we wind down. I was thinking about the Dobbs decision basically being like Seattle. So for those that don't know, in the NBA, there used to be a team, the Seattle Supersonics, that got moved stupidly to Oklahoma City. And I've noted before this, another metaphor I've made with this is to Elon Musk, where Elon Musk is saying Twitter's got to make money because we got so much debt. And then he has to cover his mouth and go, because of me. And Clay Bennett let James Harden walk, basically saying we're a small market team, and you can raise your hand and go, you're the one that made you a small market team, after saying you weren't going to do that. But what Dave Barry basically the grandfather of the site has speculated, is that the NBA uses Seattle as a motivating ploy to get money out of other teams. This has worked with, say, Sacramento as an example. They'll say Sacramento will be up for a bid for a new stadium, and they'll say, we don't want to pay taxpayer money. You shouldn't pay taxpayer money for a stadium. Don't do that. One of the reasons I'm not a Bucks fan, because Scott Walker gave money to the Bucks. Don't do it. But Sacramento will say, we don't want to give money to the Kings to make a new stadium or to upgrade their stadium. And the NBA will say, well, we can take them to Seattle. And Dave said, as long as they have that open market in Seattle, they can parade that around as a threat. Mm-hmm. And I would feel that the Roe v. Wade for years was this rallying cry that the Republicans could use, very similar to like gun control, where every election they come and say, abortion is on the ballot. If you don't vote for us, the Democrats are going to, give birth control to everybody or take away your guns. And the gun thing is ridiculous. And I'm so angry that still works, because the last president that did anything about guns was George Bush. So just keep that in mind, or at least that was true as recently as a few years ago. So that was never going to happen. But then they got control. It's almost like a dog that got the car. They got everything and they did it. And suddenly the threat's gone. And so now all the people that they were saying, that's why we needed to vote for you. It's like, well, you got that. And then all these other people said, wait a minute, we never thought you were going to do it. And so that's the awakening. So that's my convoluted metaphor.
Well, and the other, I guess the other piece of that is the Republicans could be as full-throated as they wanted about abortion without having to put their money where their mouth was, because Roe v. Wade put a limit on how far they could go. And once that limit was removed, the party was just, its activist base was going to push it in an extreme direction that the elites could not resist. And that was going to push them so far from the American man. I mean, the American mainstream is ambivalent about abortion. I don't think there's any denying that. But they hate these full-on bans that don't make exceptions for rape or incest, etc. So they have gone so far beyond where the typical voter is on that issue that and I don't know how they pull back from that, because their base is so fervent about that issue that, speaking of driving off a cliff, they are really threatening to do that to themselves.
Can I get on this one too, Dre?
Oh yeah, let's let this be the last thing, unless you come up with another good topic to follow.
We're getting close. Yeah, I mean that's definitely the optimistic scenario, right? That if we're talking about in terms of electorally, the dog did hit chase the car and got it, and they're going to get buried now. And it's worth pointing out, I saw Democratic data guy David Shore say today that even though Republicans won the turnout battle for this midterm, the Democrats won because they won independents overwhelmingly, and the independents voted because of Dobbs. So that could very well be the case. But I do want to lay out another side of it, the dismantling democracy side, is that there are other cars for that dog to chase. They're now going to chase a national abortion ban for every state, even blue states. They're now going to chase stuff like Loving versus Virginia is even on the chopping block, according to Republicans. So they're going all the way if they get enough power.
Yep.
All right. Well, glass half empty, but maybe a little half full. And on that, I'm so glad. So I as noted, I have to keep shouting this out. The Agony of Defeat podcast is the best sports plus political podcast out there. You and Matt Andrews are fantastic. And the one issue is you're both still professors, right, at UNC?
Yes.
Yeah, I think neither of you's gotten poached. I don't know. Is there much bigger? UNC is kind of.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make you diss your current employer, but I was going to say there can't be much higher than that. That is being, at the Duke of. The Duke, well, I mean, that's mean too, right? I'm saying the Duke, but then of course, I'm sure most UNC people will be upset to hear that I would call Duke a better basketball team.
After what UNC did to Duke twice in 4 weeks this spring, You can say whatever you want. We don't care. We send
Fair
Coach K off into retirement in the most beautiful way imaginable. And it's all good.
Love it. All right. So, but regardless, you actually teach this stuff for a living to people. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to do this one, but it is one of my favorite podcasts, and this kind of stuff, you know, is what you talk, which is what I love. So, got to shout that out. And of course, your Substack writing, which is it just John? I'm subscribed, so that's
It's
the
just
issue.
it's jonathanweiler.substack.com. Yeah.
Yes, and was just making sure I didn't have, you know, because I did that in the email to you initially. So you go by John Weiler on Twitter, which may or may not be relevant in the near future. Yep. I'll throw that out again. But jonathanweiler.substack.com, you have to be man, how do you only have 6 votes on what the heck did happen? More people needed. That was an amazing article. So
I just liked it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Now,
all right.
Now I'm up to 7.
All right. But anything else you want to shout out about yourself? Any other plugs, et cetera?
No, this is great. It's always fun to be on with you both. So I appreciate the invitation.
All right. Anything you want to end up on, Brian? Otherwise, I'll just lead us out.
No, same thing. Thanks to both of you. Love the conversation. I love the piece on Substack, especially the point that the polls did better than the pundits this time around. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't think we were going to have a show. Tuesday, Brian and I were both kind of despondent. I went and played Mega Man instead. So I'm glad we got a show.
I was going to be watching the election, you know, for 12 hours straight.
And so. I didn't want to watch. This was very much a sports thing. I didn't want to be anywhere near the TV. I waited till the very end to see, because you know, if Tony Evers wasn't reelected, that was going to be very depressing, and that is actually very key for the 2024 election. Having a Democratic governor in Wisconsin is massive.
For sure. Yep.
All right. Well, this has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you've been us not to our website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We've been going every 2 weeks. Go us. The Boxscore Geek Show you can find on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere podcasts are found. You can catch us live if you're following us on Twitter, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, and recaps of the show are also on Nerd Numbers. Repeat, Jonathan Weiler, our guest doctor. I didn't say doctor at all. I should do that. You know, you get the PhD, you got to get the credit. Dr. Jonathan Weiler, John Weiler on Twitter, and jonathanweiler.substack.com. Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian, and myself, Dre Alvarez, you can find on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Talk to you next time if Twitter is still around.